want to update you on a major development in the Kelly Thomas case. His death has been raising serious questions about the 6 Fullerton police officers involved in Thomas's alleged beating and the police department's response. But we're also learning the lawyer representing Thomas's family, Gara Martirosyan, is preparing a federal lawsuit in the case. The complaint could be filed as early as tomorrow, and we'll speak with you, Gara, in just a moment about that. The federal claim by the Thomas family comes as the Fullerton City Council prepares to police watchdog who would independently review Thomas's alleged beating and the Fullerton Police Department's practices. Yesterday, we spoke with the consultant the City Council is currently negotiating to bring in. His name is Michael Ginocco.
You know, these police officers didn't just come to work that day for the first time. Whatever they did was guided by the fact of their training, by the protocols and manual that was handed to them, and a lot of other things. So what we need to do is pull that apart and see whether or not there is a better way of doing business with regard to the way in which the police are protecting the community of Fullerton.
If you have been following this story with us, you know all of this. The review, investigations by the FBI and Orange County District Attorney, and now the federal complaint are in response to what alleged. These are new family pictures of Kelly Thomas provided by his dad through the family's attorney. Thomas was homeless and also schizophrenic. But the photo that we're about to show you is hard to look at, but it is a key piece of evidence. Take a look here. You're looking at what Kelly Thomas looked like before and after the alleged beating by 6 Fullerton police officers. You can see there, he's hardly recognizable. On July 5th, Fullerton police responded to reports of a man trying to break into cars near a bus station. Witnesses say what began with a search of Thomas's backpack ended with this: tasered multiple times, hog-tied face down, smashed against the concrete, his head slammed with a flashlight. Thomas died from his injuries 5 days later. The police chief, Michael Sellers, took paid medical leave last week as calls for his resignation intensified. The 6 officers allegedly involved in the beating have been placed on paid administrative leave. But what's more, according to the Los Angeles Times, those officers wrote their reports after to watch videotape of Thomas's alleged beating. Kevin Hamilton, who is stepping in as the acting Fullerton police chief, says the officers were just following standard procedure, calling it a catch-22.
If they view it, it seems like there's a sinister motive there where there's not. If they don't view it, then we're going to be accused of not making them account for their actions. If the officers are culpable criminally, or if they're culpable internally, they are going to be held accountable.
And that brings me back to Gara Martirosyan, who is representing Kelly Thomas's family. With us about this case, we've been following it. We do have a lot of questions for you. Let's talk about the federal claim that you are planning on filing tomorrow.
Well, let me tell you that we do believe, first of all, that there is something sinister going on when the police chief decides to allow these officers to view the videotape before their reports are finalized. And as we come back to the Mam story later on, as I explain to you exactly why that's so critical, because when you have 6 criminals involved in a crime, you don't put them all in one room and have them speak to one another, compare notes, and then watch a videotape to make sure that their notes jive with the videotape. You separate the criminals, and then you speak with them individually, and then you check what they have to say with one another and against the videotape. Here, they've turned that protocol on its head. These officers are not just officers in this case, investigating a case about somebody else where they might need to look at a videotape, but they are accused of battering a man to death. They are being investigated for murder, so they ought not be allowed to see that videotape before they finalize their report. It's been over 45 days, and we still have not seen the officers' reports.
I want to ask you again, though, about this federal claim that you're planning on filing tomorrow.
All right. What we'll be filing will be claims. We've already sent in notices on the state level of filing claims against the department, against these individual officers. One of the officers who was involved in yet another matter we'll discuss in a few moments, and the claims will include, obviously, the false arrest, beating to death of Kelly. to have civil rights allegations involving the federal Constitution and the deprivation of Kelly's right to live as a free citizen when he's not bothering anyone. And that will be prelude to a lawsuit later in both potentially state and federal courts, and we'll discuss that in a moment.
Gary, I want to ask you about some comments made by the DA, Tony Rackauckas. He said on our show last week when we interviewed him that the evidence, this videotape, shows that there is no evidence that the officers intended to kill Kelly Thomas. The investigation continues. They're still trying to figure out, even when you look at those pictures and you look at this video, if excessive force was used. What's your response to that?
Well, let me tell you, excessive force can be interpreted by people's conduct. You know, our prisons are full of inmates who claim they did not intend to murder. They did not intend to kill the individual they accosted. They were only going to try to control them or just teach them a lesson, and then the person just happened to die. Well, you file the charges. You let a jury decide. A jury will decide whether these officers had a right to keep beating Kelly Thomas after he had submitted, after he had passed out, after he was no longer responsive. They kept pummeling his head. They kept striking him with their knees. They kept punching him. They used a taser, the butt of a taser, to smash his head in. They used the pavement and the curb to repeatedly smash his head, and they drop-kneed his head. All this after he was no longer responding physically at all. He had passed out. Witnesses say the officers kept yelling out, "Stop resisting, stop resisting," when he had stopped talking and stopped moving completely. But they kept beating him, and eventually he died as a result of those severe blows.
The investigation does continue. That is according to witnesses. I also want to ask you, though, about one of the officers that might have been involved in this. We haven't been naming the 6 officers accused in this case, but been involved in this beating, along with another attack or another beating in a separate incident. Video from YouTube of that situation. I want to show that, and if you can, tell us exactly what happened here. What is your client's claim involving this officer who may have been involved in both of these instances?
Very well. Mr. Mam, Veth Mam, is the victim in this case. You will see an officer right here grab him, and the only thing Mr. Mam was doing was videotaping with his iPhone, interacting with the department officer. As he continued to videotape, this officer, a rather large gentleman described to be about 6'4", 250 pounds, approached Mr. Mam, who stands about 5'4", 5'5", 135 pounds, and slapped his face basically in his attempt to grab the video recorder. The camera dropped to the ground. A friend continued to record, and then we see the officer can throw him underground, knee his back, and Mr. Mam offered no resistance. He was not committing a crime. He was doing nothing wrong. He was just videotaping a police officer's interaction with one of his friends. The officers, they didn't have the opportunity to view the videotape, so they wrote lies in their reports. They claimed in their reports that Mam wasn't videotaping, but that he was jumping on the back of officers, trying to prevent officers from performing their duties, which are bold lies. That's the advantage of not showing these officers the videotape, because in this case, they didn't see the videotape, and they wrote reports that are full of lies, that there are false reports, and there will be a lawsuit filed on behalf of Mr. Mam tomorrow in federal court. Kelly Thomas case, one of the lead perpetrating officers is the same, Kenton Hampton, seen in the Mam videotape, and had the police department and the DA taken note and brought Mr. Hampton to the foreground and questioned him about his falsifying reports and bringing false charges against Mr. Mam, he would not have been there that night beating Kelly Thomas to death.
Let me just stop you for just a second, because we haven't named the officers ourselves. We don't have that name verified, so I just want to say that. And also regarding the Veth Mam case, we did actually reach out to the Fullerton Police Department. We've emailed, we've called to get their response, which we haven't gotten from them today. What are you hearing, just very quickly back to the Kelly Thomas case, what are you hearing about possible charges of the officers allegedly involved?
Well, let's start with the initial report from the police department. What they said right after this hit the news was that this was a very violent man who resisted arrest and fought back, and that two of their finest, two of the officers performing their duties that night, suffered broken bones and were hospitalized. Whatever happened to that? All of a sudden, those officers aren't coming forward. All of a sudden, they're not talking about broken bones, and it sounds like those bones were never broken. They were creating a story. They were creating a story before they could see the video. Those officers' bones were not broken, and Kelly Thomas was not violent and was not beating the officers up. The officers were beating him up. And I can tell you that I'd love to see the DA's office bring charges against these officers, but all I'm hearing is a lot of delays and a lot of excuses, and they're going to keep delaying, hoping that this will go away. But I can tell you, Kelly's dad, Ron, heard his son's plaintive cry, "Dad, Dad, Dad," as the officers continued to beat his face and pummel him to death. And Ron Thomas is not going to give up. He's going to pursue the truth. He's going to investigate. He's going to make sure that we help him investigate and people come forward. And let's find out what happened, and let's get the bad officers off the force, and let's get them criminally charged, and the good officers. And I think not all 6 of these officers are equally culpable. There's got to be 1 or 2 of them that were not involved in the beating. Please, I beg of you, come forward, stop, and break the code of silence. Come forward and tell us what happened. Tell us the truth.
Garo Martirosyan, listen, we'd all like to know the truth. That's why we're staying on this story. We'd all like to know exactly what happened in the beating death of Kelly Thomas. We appreciate your time, and we'll continue to follow this and check back with you as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.